the Truth News. It is February 13th, 2024. Thank you everybody much for coming on. We have the one and only Dr. Jim Fetzer here. Thank you very much for coming on. Please tell us what's all going on. What's happening, Jim? How are you? How's the country? How's the world?
Well, even as we're speaking this evening, the House is voting for the second time on impeaching the Secretary of Homeland Security, who is clearly deserving. He has grossly violated his obligation to faithfully execute the laws of the United States regarding the border security. In fact, he's the single most culpable member of the Biden administration in putting the country at grave risk from the point of view of national security. And he also has lied to the Congress about it. While the previous vote failed by a margin of only one, I believe tonight it will succeed, marking an unprecedented moment in U.S. history. If indeed the House Republicans can muster a simple majority to impeach Mayorkas, it'll be unprecedented. While there was one previous cabinet official to be impeached by the House, the circumstances of that scandal, featuring then Secretary of War William Belknap in 1876, was so different as to defy comparison, except in the following respect: just as Belknap was acquitted by the Senate, Mayorkas almost certainly will also be, but where Belknap was impeached for corrupt kickbacks, the most important difference thus being the purpose for their impeachment. Now, the fact that there'd be a trial, however, is very, very important, because it's going to lay out the opportunity to present all the evidence about violation of the border by the Biden administration. And frankly, it's going to be very, very bad publicity for Biden, publicity that he richly deserves. They have finally acknowledged that there is a border crisis. Perhaps as many as 6 million illegals have crossed the border since Biden was inaugurated, but where they nevertheless want to blame everyone but themselves. In fact, I don't think they assume blame, because it's their deliberate policy. What's going on here is simply outrageous, but it appears that, to me, that the Democratic National Party, the DNC itself, has been bought lock, stock, and barrel by George Soros. Many will remember it was his son who announced who would be Biden's running mate. It wasn't the DNC. It was Soros' son. And of course, Kamala Harris is an airhead, completely unqualified. So they gave us a guy who, by my best calculation, actually the real Joe Biden appears to have died in 2017. And they brought into office a series of body doubles who are just the front men, literally puppets on a string, for Barack Obama, George Soros, and Bibi Netanyahu. If I had to specify a triumvirate who are running the White House today, it's those three. For Netanyahu is basically our commander-in-chief for foreign policy, Soros our domestic president, and Obama manipulating day to day exactly what Biden says, where he goes. I've identified at least 4 Biden body doubles. One is a taller guy who doesn't have any social interaction with Jill. Another is wearing a latex mask. We've actually seen where the latex comes on the neck, and when he was in Ireland, he scratched behind his head, and you saw the rubber kind of fold up, very revealing. The third has a different shape and size of skull. He has different color eyes. He has a different handwriting. And a very different style or manner of speaking, a very different style or manner of speaking, because the old Joe Biden, if you go back to earlier videos, was very articulate. He was very expressive. He used his hands a lot, rather like myself in terms of rhetorical style. But the present Biden is like a mummified version. No affect, no articulation, no hand gestures. In fact, on at least one occasion, they have literally used a robot. This was a Biden going out to Air Force One, and he had a completely upright vertical back, and each step was a mechanical, as though it were a robot wearing a Biden mask. And I'm convinced it was a robot wearing a Biden mask. Biden, of course, blames Donald Trump for the problems at the border, but Trump actually secured our border, just as he made us energy independent, just as he gave us a thriving economy. Meanwhile, interviews with the migrants tell journalists they intend to vote for Biden. I mean, for the most part, of course, they ought not to be voting at all. But an independent journalist by the name of Nick Shirley spoke to asylum seekers in Denver, Colorado, and one after another said they were going to vote for Biden. Who are you going to vote for, he asked. Joe Biden, a woman reported. He's helping us here. A man, I believe the majority are for Biden. Another woman agreed. He's the one helping us, Biden. Another man explained, oh, of course, Biden. He likes and supports migrants. He's a very good person. Another man told him Trump is a different thing. Yes, indeed. Trump is a different thing. And there's no chance Biden could possibly be reelected with or without migrant votes. In fact, I'm convinced they're going to replace Biden after Super Tuesday, but before the Democrat convention is held in Chicago, and replace him with Gavin Newsom and Big Mike Obama, Michelle Obama. And we're going to find out if the country is willing to vote for a man with breast implants and a huge shaving bill, because the history of Michelle is going to become a major issue. I have documented, reported upon it again and again and again, and shall continue to do so. There's a wonderful little ditty out there entitled, Michelle Obama is a man, oh yeah. And it only runs about 5 minutes, but it shows lots of the photographic record. Brock and Michael together before she changed her name and adopted a female persona. Clearly the body, the physique of a man or a boy, not that of a girl or a woman. We also have photographs where you can clearly see that Michelle has a package that most women do not have. And when her husband was no longer present, she let her beard grow. We have all that as part of the record. So I think it's going to be very embarrassing for the Democrats when they move forward with Michelle as their candidate. But I'm also convinced they think that Michelle is their best bet. Meanwhile, Biden's woes continue. He was exonerated by a special counsel investigating his misuse of classified records, where it turned out his home in Delaware just abounded with classified docs here, there, everywhere, some in boxes in his garage in the vicinity of his beloved Corvette. They were utterly unsecure. It was totally inappropriate he should have them. And the special counsel, in his recommendation to the Attorney General of the United States, said he thought he should not be prosecuted because he was an elderly man with a poor memory. Frankly, the classified records laws make no allusion to motivation or circumstance. You either handle classified documents properly or you do not. He clearly did not. He clearly is deserving of legal prosecution, unlike Donald Trump. And let me make three key points here. Biden had no secure place for these documents. It requires a special kind of vault. Donald Trump had the special kind of vault that had been approved by both the National Archives and by the FBI. Second of all, Biden claimed he didn't have any documents that were actually classified, which was completely false. The special prosecutor observed he had tons of documents that were actually classified. Whereas with regard to Trump, he had a standing order that any documents he took home were automatically declassified. And that comes to the most important difference between the two. Because Trump was a president of the United States, he had the ultimate declassification authority. He could declassify anything just by snapping his fingers. Joe Biden, however, was vice president. Vice president had no declassification authority. So the cases are enormously different. Biden clearly deserved prosecution, but won't be. Trump clearly not deserving of prosecution, but is already being pursued in the court. So the situation is quite outrageous and very much indicative of where things stand in the United States politically regarding the enforcement of law and the double standard being imposed by the Biden administration to exonerate Joe, no matter how serious the offense, not to mention, of course, what has happened in regard to his relationship with his son Hunter, where the evidence of malfeasance, of criminal acts, is simply overwhelming, but where nothing has yet to be done about it. I would further add that the issue of Biden's cognitive competence has become a real one in relation to the political climate with nomination campaigns underway. Indeed, 62% of Americans say that Biden's cognitive competence, his age, and so forth are serious issues to them as they anticipate casting their votes for nominees for their respective parties. So this isn't going to go away until Biden is taken out. He might retire voluntarily, pardon Hunter in the process, and step aside. Or it may be that the DNC simply decides to replace him. The rules that regulate these parties, which are private companies, are very open. Thus, for example, in the past, we had the Seth Rich scandal, where Seth, who supported Bernie Sanders, was the IT guy for the DNC. And when they transferred 13 primaries that Bernie had won into Hillary's column so they could guarantee she would become the nominee, he, Seth Rich, downloaded data directly from the DNC files and then shared it with Julian Assange, where no less an eminence than William Binney, who is perhaps our nation's leading expert on cybersecurity, observed the download had taken place in the Eastern time zone and at a rate that was far too rapid for distant Russian hacking, which, of course, was the cover story the Democrats were promulgating at the time, and where it appears that John Podesta, who had been one of Hillary's campaign managers, sought to set an example for anyone who would betray the party and instructed Seth Rich to be shot. This is the opinion of my research on this matter, a lot of which can be found in my book entitled The Russia Hoax, but that the MS-13 members they hired only wounded Seth Rich, and he was taken to a hospital in Washington, D.C., and later died under circumstances that are at least semi-mysterious, but where Hillary is very vengeful toward people who portray her, and where I would not at all be surprised if she hadn't been the one to initiate the hit rather than Podesta. She, after all, fabricated the whole idea of Russian interference in the election to enable Trump to beat her, when in fact the explanation is a whole lot simpler. The election of 2016, and I did massive research on this at the time, was rigged for Hillary. But in order to steal an election, you have to go where the votes are. The votes were in the big cities. That Richard Charnon, who's an expert in this area, explained to me. What happened in the case of 2016 is that there was a tremendous upsurge in votes from rural areas that the Democrats had not anticipated that put Trump in office. So they had to go all out to ensure it didn't happen again in 2020. And now, believe it or not, we have a new study of mail-in balloting where 1 in 5 of those who were polled, and this was a very systematic Radisson poll of over 1,000, 1 in 5 admitted acting improperly with regard to mail-in balloting, so that they followed up with an analysis about how this affected the swing states. And would you believe, after extensive analysis using raw survey data coupled with mail-in vote totals, we concluded that mail-in voter fraud almost certainly changed the 2020 election outcome in all 6 crucial swing states. I mean, this is fascinating. Thus, they're advising it's incumbent upon the 50 states to ensure that their voting systems are as safe and secure as possible. We have time to make the necessary changes. The changes that would be timely would be to return to paper ballots and hand counts. But according to their research, had rampant mail-in voter fraud been prevented in the 2020 election, Donald Trump would have won the Electoral College and been reelected to a second term. And we would have been able to forego all of this nonsense at the border. He would have kept us energy independent. He would have done everything within his power to crack down and maintain law and order in America. We would have had a surging economy. We almost certainly would not have been supporting Israel with massive supplies to slaughter Palestinians. And I doubt very much it would have even been a war in Ukraine. But there it is. We have the Democrat legacy. Let us hope that steps are taken to correct before, lest it should happen again, because what the country has been going through is completely outrageous. Meanwhile, we had the journalistic event of the decade with Tucker Carlson interviewing Vladimir Putin. Just to give you a quantitative measure, MSNBC averages 1.22 million viewers. CNN, only 582. Fox, the most successful of the alternative, 1.85. So you put that together, you get about 3.5 million altogether. Tucker's interview, now over 50 million in the first 5 hours. And I'll tell you, it's probably going to reach 300 million before it's all said and done. There was a curious aspect about it because there was a transcript released in advance, published by worthy sources such as State of the Nation, that created the impression there'd been a back and forth between Tucker and Putin that was pretty conventional in terms of journalistic interviews. And I looked at it. I did a show with Scott Bennett on the air, the Tucker Putin interview on his Global Great Awakening show. We went through the interview line by line, but it turned out that was not the actual interview, which, as everyone who's watched now know, began with a virtual tutorial on the history of Ukraine, beginning around 800 AD, and where Vladimir Putin carried us through the complexity of what had happened in Eastern Europe in the meanwhile, explained how Ukraine was a fabricated state, that it was artificial, put together with parts of Romania, parts of Hungary, parts of Poland. Reading between the lines, my inference would be that if the Russian Federation is required to take all of Ukraine, and frankly, I believe it is going to be forced to take all of Ukraine, that because Russia doesn't want all of Ukraine, it's going to give back those parts of Romania to Hungary and to Poland that were originally integrated to create this artificial state of modern day Ukraine. He also explained what he had done before in a magisterial speech on the eve of the special military operation intervening in Ukraine, that since there had been a coup in Kiev in 2014, which was, we know, you and I have discussed it before, engineered by Victoria Nuland of our Department of State, using $5 billion in American taxpayer dollars to drive out the Russia-friendly, democratically elected president of Ukraine and replace him with a Western stooge, of whom Zelensky is the successor. That artillery bombardments of the Donbass, which is populated by ethnic Russian-friendly population, have been ongoing, and that in the years since, over 2,000 Russian civilians had been killed, that Ukraine was on the verge of launching a mass invasion of the Donbass that would have led to a slaughter of the population analogous to what the Israelis are doing in Gaza today, and that Russia had to intervene. And while he didn't mention it specifically, to the best of my recollection, there's some 30 biological labs, most of which, if not all, were run by the American Department of Defense, including some developing race-specific bioweapons to kill Russians, for example, specifically to kill Russians. And this, of course, is totally outrageous. It's a gross violation of international law, but then that's exactly what's been happening not only in Ukraine, but in Israel as well. Paul Craig Roberts, whom I regard as our nation's leading public intellectual, is concerned. He puts it this way, Wordsworth, sharing. although his questions were on the sophomoric side, hang on. I'm recording. I'll call you as soon as I'm off. 30 minutes less. Okay, you got it. Although his questions were on the sophomoric side, Tucker Carlson did a good thing by giving us a 2-hour view of how Putin thinks. The neoconservative warmongers and the shills for the armament industries are angry because Putin did not present, as they have portrayed him, as an evil aggressor out to conquer Europe. What came across from Tucker's interview with Putin is that he remains a captive even after all of the betrayals and deceptions he has suffered of his ideal of reaching an agreement with the West. In other words, he still seems to have some confidence in the West, in spite of the fact that, for example, the peace agreement that had been reached with the Minsk agreement was violated by the West, and where Angela Merkel, the chancellor of Germany, even acknowledged it was only to buy time to arm Ukraine, that Putin, having suffered that indignity, which in my opinion, frankly, would lead to a total loss of confidence in the West, that their word is meaningless, that they cannot be trusted. Here, Paul Craig Robert picks up and says he discounts Washington's insistence on its hegemony. The fact doesn't fit with Putin's idealistic approach to international relations. He still hopes sanity and goodwill will emerge in the West. That's an illusion, I'm sorry to say. His idealism blocks him from proactive actions, which he regards as provocative. He has yet to accept that his tolerance of Western aggression encourages more aggression, and this continues to frustrate the emergence of the cooperative multipolar world that he envisions, and I add which BRICS, for example, represents. I don't think we're going to get the mutual defense treaty between Russia, China, Iran that would cause Washington's neoconservatives to accept reality and give up their goal of American hegemony. Watching the interview will help to free the audience from the propaganda that keeps us in the matrix. My concern, Paul Craig Roberts observes, remains that Putin's reasonableness, the fact that he's a rational person who's a decent human being, will continue to be taken advantage of by Washington until the conflict Putin seeks to avoid becomes unavoidable. And I'm sorry to say, I think Paul Craig Roberts has it right that the fundamental advantage those who are unethical and immoral have over those who are ethical and moral is that the unethical and immoral are willing to do things, to use techniques, to conduct practices that decent moral people will not. Thus, they lie, they cheat, they steal, they feign sincerity, they sign agreements they have no intention of preserving or upholding, which make good, decent people like Vladimir Putin potentially vulnerable. And I therefore agree with Paul Craig Roberts. This was really a good thing because, number one, it explained to the public why the Russian Federation was forced by circumstances to intervene in Ukraine. Second, it made it very clear Russia has no territorial ambitions beyond Ukraine. In fact, it doesn't even want all of Ukraine. And third, that Putin is a very sane, articulate, knowledgeable, intelligent man, where I'd say his IQ is in the stratosphere, conservatively 180. Look, that opening monologue, if you want to call it, was so masterful, so intricate, so detailed. I know of not a single Western political figure who could be his equal intellectually, or in terms of knowledge, or in terms of intelligence. He put to shame to the rest of the world. And of course, when you consider what the United States is having to suffer through with these Biden imposters, it's really stunning. The contrast could not be greater. Meanwhile, miscreants right here in the United States, such as Hillary Clinton, want to characterize Tucker as a useful idiot. She talked about him also as being a puppy dog. She really meant a lap dog, because that's a phrase that's often been used in the past. There are others who have criticized Tucker, and even a member of the EU Parliament has threatened sanctions against him. But in fact, what he did exemplified the highest standards of journalism, and indeed in the past, Barbara Walters interviewed Vladimir Putin. George Stephanopoulos interviewed Vladimir Putin. Brian Williams interviewed Vladimir Putin. Those were all heralded as feats of journalism worthy of applause, admiration, even adulation. Tucker interviews Vladimir Putin. Treason, lapdog, traitor. I mean, just outrageous, a contrast. Tucker did the right thing. Now, it is the case that there were major issues that were not addressed. Most importantly, what's going on in Israel. And I cannot say whether that was prior agreement that Tucker not go there, but the situation in Israel is catastrophic. And I believe Vladimir Putin has yet to play, but may very well play, a major role in its resolution. Right now, the Israelis are going full steam ahead, notwithstanding the finding of the International Court of Justice that they had committed plausible genocide. And what we had was the equivalent of a grand jury proceeding before the International Court of Justice as to whether South Africa had a case. And the grand jury decided South Africa had a case, and thus brought a bill of indictment against Israel, which now will have to stand trial, and where the United Nations may or may not take ultimate action. It's pretty obvious going in that the Security Council is not going to act against Israel, because the United States, and now it would appear even the United Kingdom, are not going to allow it. Where the United States supplies, providing supplies in superabundance. At least 250 cargo planes, at least 20 ships, have delivered more than 10 tons of armaments and military equipment to Israel, without which the genocide could not continue, are going to be found by history and potentially by international courts complicit in genocide. Frankly, the United States is in dire straits in the eyes of the world. We have a president who's viewed as a joke. He's completely incompetent. And the irresponsibility of the United States in relation to Israel by providing the weapons, the materials for the genocide to take place, leaves us as accessories to genocide, a stain I fear the United States will never outlive. This will be permanent in the eyes of the world forever. And that's the latest from the front.
Wow, Jim. Thank you for the insights. Whether we like it or not, that is what can we say about any of that? Hopefully it all ends well. That all's well that ends well. But before we end here, what can we ask you? What your predictions are on how this is all going to end? Do you have predictions between everything? The USA, the Ukraine-Russian war, is that going to end soon? What are your predictions on some of this stuff?
Well, the Ukraine war is already lost. Colonel McGregor has been very clear. They've run out of men. They've lost 500,000 troops in 2 years in the war with Russia. Just to give a contrast, we lost 50,000 in Vietnam, but that was over a 10 or 12-year period. In only 2 years, Ukraine has lost 500,000. They do not have 500,000 more to replace them. They've run out of munitions. They've run out of tanks. The war in Ukraine is over. There are hints that NATO would like to step in on behalf of Ukraine. But frankly, Russia can overwhelm NATO. Russia is the most formidable military force in the world today. And I foresee, given especially what appears to be the blockage of further aid for Ukraine in the Congress now, just as we have been speaking, I believe that they're going to have to just make a pretense of Ukraine having had a noble role here. There's no way Ukraine can win, and anyone who suggests as much is simply spouting propaganda. I wish I could be very positive about the outcome in Israel. The genocide is so massive, even though Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and I'm so in awe of the Houthis in Yemen, who are ferocious fighters, interdicting shipping in accordance with international law because the Houthis have declared war on Israel. They've explained they're only interdicting cargo destined for Israel. They've also added that they will cease when the food and water and supplies are allowed into Gaza. They have been attacked by both U.S. and U.K. planes with massive bombs, even using B-1 bombers, all in violation of Yemen's national sovereignty and of international law, on the ground that the Houthis are interfering with international shipping, not acknowledging the Houthis have declared war on Israel and that they're entitled under the laws of war to take the very actions they're taking, which in my judgment means the United States and the UK are both thereby committing war crimes. They're violating the Hague Convention, the Geneva Convention, and international law. And it's only a puppet media that doesn't allow that leaves people to have any doubt. But I'm terribly worried that by the time actions are taken to stop Israel, that a very large segment of the Palestinian population will have been slaughtered. It's all wrong. This is the only genocide in history to be broadcast 24/7 worldwide. And Israel has sacrificed the victimhood card that it's played since World War II, because now the Israelis are acting more viciously toward the Palestinians than the German soldiers acted toward them, which was mostly a myth and an exaggeration, but where what's going on in Palestine today is not. And they stand exposed as thumbing their nose at international law. They are a rogue nation. They are a terrorist state. And sad to say, the United States is complicit with them in every such regard. So I'm hoping that the world is going to come to its senses and take strong action to bring this to an end. It may occur when Israel provokes a war against Iran, because Iran has a massive arsenal of conventional weapons, more than sufficient to destroy Israel. I do make this prediction without specifying the timeline. Israel's existence, even physically, is in doubt. And most certainly, it may be cast out of the United Nations as a minimal consequence of the acts of genocide taking place over this last period of years. It is so tragic, and we hear so many new horror stories on a daily basis. The world will never respect or feel the same about Israel again. And sad to say, the same is true with regard to the USA.
Well, let's hope all this destruction comes to an end and peace is brought back forth. And before we go, I want to mention, please, of course, visit jameshfetzer.org, right? And then also as well as givesendgo.com/funding Fetzer.
Let me mention, I've just published a complete transcript with Vladimir Putin plus a video where you can watch the entire thing. Absent a translator, it has subtitles. So you can hear Tucker's voice, Putin's voice, subtitles, and then the whole transcript for the entire event, which was historic. Check it out, jameshfetzer.org. I'm also on Twitter at Jim Fetzer.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Everybody, stay tuned. Please pay attention and go to his websites, check it out, help him out. And God bless everybody. God bless the country. Keep in touch. Thank you. Take care.
My pleasure.